Frederik Gregaard joins me on this episode to talk about a whole bunch of things that the Cardano Foundation does. And a whole bunch of things that I didn't know it did. We also hit on a couple of really topical conversations about what the community has said about the Cardano Foundation recently as well, along with the future plans of the foundation too. All right, let's get into it. So, Frederick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a joy to be here. I nearly feel the warmth of Australia.
It is absolutely fantastic. The weather today is amazing, and I find it actually really hard to travel around other parts of the world where it's less than 20 degrees Celsius. So, you know, it was a little bit hard when I was in a rare bloom in Denver. And for me, that was really, really cold. Yeah, we'll work on that and make sure all these global events are when it's warm in summer in Europe, etc. But let's get into a little bit about you. So not everyone knows much about the Cardano Foundation or your role itself. So can we learn a little bit about how you got into the crypto space and what your role is in the Cardano Foundation?
Sure. I'm not sure you can say that I got into crypto. It's probably more like I got into blockchain and the democratization of what it could do, not just to financial systems, but to all systems. So very early in my career, I was on a path of democratizing finance. So how could we ensure that everybody had equal access to financial systems, to financial products, to investment opportunities, to data, to metadata, all those things. And then when Bitcoin came along, I was at that time building banking infrastructure, building asset managers, exchanges. So very much what you call an investment banker with focus on infrastructure. I started helping some of these startups to get banked, because even though they were representing something which could live without banks, they still needed a salary and they needed to pay rent and all those things. And so that's kind of how I got into it. Started mentoring some of those, and then over time. I progressed deeper and deeper into the space of really using blockchain technology and putting it into places where it can be really used for something very beneficial. And one of the big use cases, of course, is crypto. And as I am a banker, I understand financial markets pretty well. I kind of, did a lot in the crypto space as well. But my main interest has always been really around the actual blockchains and the applications of blockchains and what that does for systems around the world.
And what about your role specifically at the foundation? So what do you do for the foundation as CEO?
Yeah, so I do a little bit of everything, you can say. So when I came on board, it was a kind of a pivotal moment. It was before smart contracts. It was before metadata. It was just around the closing of the incentivized testnet. What I really thought was important was that the Cardano Foundation had a very clear strategy, so that we could, start measuring what are we doing, why are we doing it, and is it the right thing to do? But also start carving out the role of the Cardano Foundation in this, extremely interesting but also very large cryptocurrency, but also blockchain ecosystems who were evolving and still are evolving. In that process, I've been very hands-on, so I've been doing, sometimes everything from cold storage and the ability for, doing voting with the Cardano Foundation's assets to, using BFT keys, but also to enabling projects like Veritree and Georgia, and ensuring that we actually had people who understood the Cardano blockchain in the Cardano Foundation. And when I say that, it's not about understanding what Cardano as a protocol can do in the future, but it's the ability also to read the code, to understand the architecture, the networking layer. Because my belief is that when you deal with technology, only by understanding it, being able to use it, and actually using it, you'll be able to have an opinion about it. And so one of the things we put a lot of focus on in the first year was ensuring that the we got some really good technical people on board, and we gave them a trajectory for them to being able not just to do integration work, which was already started before I came, but continue the work on integration and go beyond exchanges and banks, and also move into use cases. You move into actually ensuring, how do you deploy metadata? How do you do NFTs? How do we, look at the SIPS process? How can we improve the SIPS process, as we just done right now, to actually get up to a state where we can say we are maybe not leading, but at the edge of what we know from open source software programming and blockchain projects. But also very small things that, how do we actually employ people in Australia? How do we employ people in Argentina or in Hong Kong and so on? So international labor law. But also large things as talking to the regulators around the world, because some of the big problems we have is clarity around regulation and educating regulators, because a lot of the things we do in blockchain is, in lack of other words, we don't agree on what words we are using. So when the regulator says staking, what you and I love with staking with Cardano is certainly not the same as other staking protocols. Now, it might look on the surface as the same, and let's be very honest, there isn't a lot of very good descriptions of what is the differences. But that's why I want to support people like you who is actually teaching about Cardano, because only by teaching people what is the difference between a positive incentivized staking protocol, according to game theory and mathematics, compared to one who is negative and positive incentivized, where you have slashing and locking periods. And those differences are immense, and they are actually potentially can cut away innovation and cut away the ability for people to build and live on Cardano as blockchain citizens. So in a weird way, you can say I have one of those jobs who spans between, being very dirty and paying salaries and talking VAT and protecting the foundation and our intellectual property right of Cardano and ADA around the world, to talking labor law and doing large projects with international, multinational companies and ensuring that we get the largest exchanges live, but also that you can actually use single stake pool operators and go even further and actually deploy your ADA while having some kind of an organized custody solution. So it's really a lot. And one of the things we also do a lot is facilitate discussions with the community. So we're trying very much also to represent the community towards some of the larger entities which operates in the Cardano ecosystem as well.
So yes, there is a lot there. And there was a couple of things that you mentioned that I just want to pick up on. One of the things that I've been trying to do here in Australia is get some of the local exchanges to actually list ADA, and they still don't have ADA. And I approached them and tried to make introductions and connect with the right people. What does it actually take for the exchanges to list a certain currency like ADA? And do they actually? What type of engagement do they have with you to actually make that happen?
So this is one of the things we've been extremely quiet with, of different regulatory reasons. But we've lately been a bit more open about it. So today we support about 340, 350 exchanges, regulated exchanges and banks out of the foundation. And when I say support, what it really means is that we support the technical integration, maintenance, including Q&A support desk, but also very often compliance and operating model. Now, we are not a law firm, and we don't try to be one. But when you are an exchange and you have, hundreds of tokens to choose from, and you have all these regulatory changing environments and very little clarity from the regulatory side, you tend to have two types of exchanges. You have the exchanges who kind of accept that they need to be regulated, and they go all the way into being banks or regulated custodians. And then you have exchanges who kind of said, you know what, I don't think we need a regulation because we're not holding funds. We're actually holding a, digital code, or we are facilitating the exchange of digital code. So I'm not just talking about DEXs here, but I'm talking also about, let's say exchanges who has a different view on the services they're doing. And that's one of the, let's say, I wouldn't say problems, But in the normal financial markets, we have very clear terminology about, what is a broker dealer, what is a bank, what is a custodian, and we don't really have that yet in the crypto space, because some of us still think that there's a lot more to blockchain and crypto than just financial products. And then there's others who say, oh, we just adopt the actual terminology of what we see in capital markets. But the short and the long of this is that Cardano is a public permissionless blockchain. So there's nothing stopping you from just, enabling ADA in your local exchange. Now, we can shortcut that a little bit by giving you access to our technical team. We even have, let's call it a reference exchange, which we are trying to make better and better. And we have the Address stack, which helps you to manage the relationship to the Cardano blockchain, including change addresses and all those things through the wallet backend and so forth. Plus, we have different reporting tools. So we can do quite a lot. And I was actually just in Singapore last week, the Singapore FinTech Festival, had the opportunity to join a panel. We were invited as the only blockchain to interact with the MAS and with the UK FSA, so the regulators, around wash trading, around market manipulation, around compliance in banks and exchanges who offer cryptocurrencies. And we're now invited back both to the UK FSA, but also to the MAS to continue those dialogues, because we have a very deep understanding of how can you operate that, and how can you actually use the tools of blockchains to make it a much better and much safer environment for the clients who lives on those blockchains through an intermediary like an exchange.
That's brilliant.
So for certain countries, there is something called a whitelisting. So the ADA need to be whitelisted, so kind of approved by the FSCA. So very often we do some of that work either together with a local exchange or directly. So for instance, in Japan, we helped a couple of exchanges to interact with what's called the JVCA, which is the Japanese regulatory organization who basically do this whitelisting to get ADA whitelisted. And by getting ADA whitelisted, what it really means is also you can actually start building on the Cardano protocol in Japan, because you obviously need the ADA token to activate smart contracts and those things. Yeah. So it's the first step actually also to allowing for enterprise applications, but also allowing to run a gaming protocol, or allowing to do NFTs or stuff like that. And
I had no idea.
Yeah. So it spans quite far, really. Certain things we do, and to be honest, they're not very attractive, right? It's I kind of think about it sometimes. It's like the air we breathe, right? So we don't really notice it's there, but if it's not there, we certainly notice it, right? And sometimes we kind of assume that we can just use a public permissionless blockchain in the society we live in, and we all hope that is the truth. But there is some societal norms, and there is some local regulation, and there is some reporting needs, and there is some things which need to be taken care of, and that's typical a cost. And typically, if you have to make a choice, you sometimes take the easy way around some of those things. But we think that Cardano needs to be here for the generations to come, and therefore we do believe that we need to walk that path. And we also think that this over-regulation doesn't make sense. And therefore, we need to be very specific about why it is that the Cardano architecture is so unique and how it fits in much better than many other blockchains.
So what type of work, other than what you just mentioned there, do you do with regulators in general? Like, this is one thing, like you said, no one really knows about, and it's not very pretty. It's not very exciting. What other work have you guys done recently or in the past around regulations? Who have you worked with? What type of regulations are you trying to push to make the adoption better for Cardano?
So I want to make one thing extremely clear, right? So I'm not a fan of over-regulating anything. I'm probably more of a bit on the libertarian side of that, and of the free will and market forces. I do believe in the free will of people. I do believe that if people have access to education, and they should have the free will to decide what they do. However, I do think that we are in a situation right now where We just have to realize, and I mean, we're recording it today where there's a lot going on around FTX and Binance and so on, that a lot of retail investors has been hurt by investing in cryptocurrencies. Now, blockchain needs crypto, but crypto doesn't need blockchain. And what I mean about that is a true public permissionless blockchain, which is so beautiful, like Cardano and the proof of stake consensus Cardano deploys. You need to have access to ADA. But what happens when millions of people buy ADA because of the potential value increase, but they don't buy it to deploy it for a gaming use case or for a back office use case or for supply chain, then a lot of regulators step in and say it doesn't matter what you designed the token to do. What matters is how people use it. And therefore, we feel that we are obliged to step in and guide, help regulators and policymakers so we don't come into a situation that we actually regulate Cardano out of use. Could you imagine that only a few people in a country would be allowed, or if any, look at China, for instance, would be allowed to hold ADA? Then the whole utility value of the blockchain that you can't use the beauty of, it's pointless, really, right? So I was in Brussels 2 weeks ago, and I interacted with with different members of parliament there, and I interacted with some of the big think tanks and some of the policymakers there, because there's a new regulation called MiCA, which is coming into force, and they're very narrowly focused on stable coins, both let's say asset-backed stable coins and what we call basket stable coins. So they didn't look so much at algorithmic stable coins, which is kind of interesting, but they probably look at that under the basket principle, and then they looked at what they call other crypto tokens, but they actually took NFTs and DeFi out. And what I then kind of, advocate for is that one of the things which we did before when we looked at regulation is we said that we need to be technology agnostic. And what that really means is that when you think about something like the internet, we shouldn't really be focusing on if it's Amazon Web Services or if it's Google or, what kind of ICP who's doing it and those kind of things. We just say, the technology is the internet, and we're basically looking at the use of the internet. And I must admit that I don't think that's adequate anymore. I think we need to be technology specific now. Why do we need to be technology specific? Well, because the blockchains work dramatically different. So just because it's a public permissionless blockchain, what's under the hood is so different in terms of the incentive mechanisms, in terms of the potential, or is it a financial contract? Is it not a financial contract? Is it asset management you're doing when you're doing a stake pool? Because it certainly looks like it if you look at it, right? And I think Cardano has done some fantastic architectural choices who actually allows us to operate in most of these spaces without actually falling into those traps, because it's a positive incentivized mechanism. So so we speak to these policymakers and regulators when they send out suggestions for regulation. We answer some of those. We cannot answer all of them. We are a quite small team. We collaborate with other layer one blockchains, or strive to collaborate with them to prove or to push proof of stake, which we think is extremely important. I mean, there's many ways to do consensus, right? But we really advocate for proof of stake. And in this way, we try to really kind of change the narrative from cryptocurrencies is always on a proof of work blockchain, and crypto is about speculation, to what can you actually do on these beautiful blockchains in terms of utility. And one of the fantastic things you can do is cryptocurrencies and stable coins, but it's one out of many. And today we are unfortunately in a situation that most of the regulators and policymakers only have a focus on crypto. And that's a bit sad if you look at job creation, and if you look at the ability to create identities and, bank the unbanked, and, do supply chain use cases and all the other things you can actually have there. And when we then start opening up and speaking about them, they become extremely excited.
Yeah. I guess that comes down to where the retail market is and where consumers are complaining the most, I guess, when they're losing their assets and their investment into certain blockchains. So I guess that's where regulators look to, because that's who's voting for them, the legislators, etc. The consumers are voting for them and putting them in power in those positions to make perform their jobs, essentially.
Yeah, speaking about that, it sometimes is also a good thing to kind of look at what is the Cardano Foundation and what is the purpose of the Cardano Foundation, maybe. I don't know if this is a good time to kind of speak about that. But
probably is a good segue to talk about an overview of what the foundation is supposed to do, what's its role, etc.
So many people who come into a blockchain, they're kind of used to that there is a foundation, and often it's in Switzerland, not always, but often it's in Switzerland, and that foundation does certain things, and there's a monetary policy, and it kind of the heart of the blockchain is the foundation. Cardano is completely different. The Cardano Foundation is actually a consequence of the founders, and is not the start of the journey. So when we kind of look at the history of Cardano a bit, there was a voucher sale being done mainly in Japan, which was fully KYC'd and AML, which is a fantastic thing that Charles Hodkinson and Ken Kodama-san did with their teams back then. It's truly unique that they were really thinking so far already back then. And then, IOG and later Imurko, in the sense we have today, were founded. And then basically the Cardano Foundation came after that. And the company construct is actually like this, that the Cardano Foundation doesn't own or control the Cardano blockchain. We didn't found the Cardano blockchain. We are a consequence of the actions of the early founders, who basically said that it was very important that they had an unbiased entity with the purpose of promoting this new technology development and the applications, in particular open decentralized software architecture, which is is difficult to swallow in a centralized architecture world. And in the foreground, but not only exclusively, is the promotion of the so-called Cardano protocol and the corresponding technologies. So that's what we call the address share stack and all of that, including promotion and support of applications using this technology. And this sets us completely apart, because we don't control. We have 2 out of 7 Genesis keys. So that means that we don't have a way to kind of force a decision in. We don't have any contracts with, let's say, the developers of Cardano. So we didn't scope out or issued, let's say, dear development company, you need to build this and this and this, and there's a money flow going from a treasury in the foundation to the development company. No, we actually got a set of money at that time with the purpose of doing this. And the Swiss foundation construct basically means that we have some checks and balances in place. So we actually have a financial regulator. It's just called a foundation regulator, who basically checks us every year, both with an audit to them, but an audit also to a normal auditor, and keeping us in check, meaning that we have to do what the articles of association, or in this case called a foundation deed, is saying, which was what I just said, the promotion of these technology developments and applications. And if we don't do that, the board is actually personally liable. So they can actually go to jail for diverting from this. So there's some very heavy checks and balances in place on what the founders actually decided that the Cardano Foundation should do. And but it also gives us some freedom, because we are not the inventors of the protocol. We didn't do the ICO out of the Cardano Foundation. We don't control the monetary policy. It allows us to take more risk than what other foundations can do. And some of that risk we actually use to engage with companies who wants to have a contract, to help them to do an integration, for instance. Regulators or policymakers who wants to speak to us about certain things. We are actively pushing banks and exchanges to participate and let their clients participate in voting on the blockchain and in allowing delegation to single stake pool operators and so forth. So it's one of those things. As I started out, you always say, oh, it's a staking is staking, and then when you scratch the surface, it's not the same. And then you say, oh, it's a blockchain foundation, and when you scratch the surface, you figure out that many of those foundations, they don't have something as beautiful as Catalyst. They don't have, they're not as far on the decentralization journey as we are. But I think the hugest difference is really that most of the foundations were the founder or the founders of the ecosystem as such. And the Cardano Foundation is more a consequence of the founding of the Cardano protocol, which gives us a complete different mandate and some very different things we can do, which others can't do, but it also gives us some limitations in terms of, what we can do in terms of influencing the monetary policy or influencing the roadmap and so forth.
Wow. Okay. So I always thought that the three founding entities were created all at the same time. And this really clears that up. So it came as a consequence of the other two and needing that foundation to steer the direction, essentially. So thank you for clearing that up.
It's actually not so much about steering the direction. It's more about the promotion of the technology, and also like maybe a little bit like a buffer. You can think about it like that. But many other blockchain foundations, for instance, they basically hold the roadmap, the technology roadmap, or they hold the governance, and they did the ICO and they issued the token. And many who can print tokens, they still do that, right? And none of those functions actually is with the Cardano Foundation. So that is a very big difference. If you're interested, we can put it into the show notes, because this is actually is available on a public Swiss website, which is we cannot change. So it's basically governmental locked in, and you can't change the purpose of the foundation that easy. It actually takes a long governance process because the whole idea is that the money is in a foundation is safeguarded to a purpose, and that purpose has to be fulfilled. And then actually over time, the idea about Swiss foundations normally is that they unwind. They kind of cease to exist when there's no more money. Because then the purpose is done, right? And what we see now with the blockchain foundations is that the road to decentralization is a little bit longer than what the early people like me and others kind of expected, really. And some of these foundations are now, probably going to exist, a bit longer than we all hoped for, because there is some need to take some of this liability, for instance, against a regulator or against an exchange or whatever that might be. Mm-hmm. But there could also be a need for having some institutions who is specialized in a certain part of the ecosystem, or might be specialized in verifying or authenticating certain things are being delivered, or in other ways being there. But it cannot be the goal of the Cardano Foundation to exist forever. At least that's not the intent. We hope that the community will mature over time and start chopping away at what we do and basically take it over. That's at least that's the hope, because when Cardano becomes so big, then nearly everything becomes a business model, whether you're in the value creation segment or in the value capture layer. And as that becomes larger business models, right, then somebody would be interested in specializing in that and doing that support and service on the infrastructure layer.
Wow, very, very interesting. I had no idea about these particulars around foundations eventually dissolving and once they run out of money, etc. And we'll talk about funding and whatnot a little bit later as well. But we've gone through a really good overview of what the foundation does, that perception there. And I think a lot of people just don't know a lot of the groundwork that you have to do, or the boring work, as you say, that the foundation has to do for the protocol to actually be promoted and used around the world. Now, there's a bit of conversation recently on Twitter, on the forums, around this essentially. And one of them, I'll just bring this one up here, and it was a little bit of a controversial post on the forums titled "Cardano Foundation is a scam." And I'll just put it up on screen for anyone that wants to see that there, but I'll just read out the first bit here. Cardano Foundation is a scam. They're not accountable to IOG. They're not accountable to the community. There is no mechanism to hold them to account. While the other foundations are scoring deals with the likes of Instagram, reaching out grassroots artist organizations, the Cardano Foundations are out tasting wine in Georgia. I think that's a little bit of an unfair comment. At this point, I'm exacerbated that there is no mechanism to hold them to account, so that there will be a fork of the chain to remove their funds. Don't know if that's even possible, or at least create a serious threat to do that, so that they recognize the community are serious and unhappy about their performance. Thoughts and comments. And this thread post was posted, I think, on the 4th of November. It's been ongoing for quite a while now. What are your thoughts on this? Is it a communication thing? Is it a limitation to what you guys can actually say and do due to NDAs? Is it what's the problem here exactly?
So it's extremely hard for me to kind of nail down what the problem is, but there's certainly a lot of things who's inaccurate in that statement you just read up. Yeah. And I think normally, only bad things come out when you kind of point fingers and say, this is inaccurate, and, I said, you said, and all of those things. I think what we need to understand is that Cardano has one of the largest communities in the world, if not the most active community. And we should be extremely proud of that, because the community is what makes Cardano what it is today. And I speak to a lot of founders and CEOs and CEOs of other very large blockchains. And one of the only questions I get again and again is, how is it that you can have such a passionate and such a, growing community? I mean, how do we get that? Because a lot of them has been, spending a lot more money than what Cardano ever spent or ever had available for buying deals, or buying access to, investment banks or social media platforms and so on. And they're simply not getting the traction which we see Cardano is getting. Now, one thing I probably would like to say is that I kind of hinted at it in the start. We are actually accountable to the Swiss regulator, which is called the Foundation Supervisory Authority. And we are so accountable for it that our board actually can go to jail if they don't do what the original founders instructed us to do. So we are kind of very accountable towards that. Plus, we're very accountable towards, we are obviously, we have an audit requirement, and which we are living up to from the financial side, which is a part of being under this regulator as well. There was this notion about doing deals and so on. So when the original entities or the federation or was founded, right? There was the whole idea was that Charles, with his fantastic technology know-how and his vision, he should be responsible for the academic research, the engineering, and the deployment of the first version of Cardano, including the errors, which which we've seen, and we're now in heavily going towards Voltaire, and we're looking very much forward to seeing the announcements at Scotfest coming up next week. And Imurco should really be the marketing, the commercialization, the bootstrapping, and the education arm, where we should be more the longer edged sword, if you can say it this way, and really focus on the promotion and the enablement of the protocol, as also stipulated in the deed, right? So it is correct that we do feel that Cardano has not done the marketing it potentially should have done. And we've taken the consequence of that, and that's one of the reasons that we are hiring a lot of people in marketing right now, and we are taking over the Cardano Summit. IOD has been very good at hosting that last year, and we participated and sponsored that very heavily. And this year we are 100% running that in 50 different countries around the world. And the main event will be in Lausanne. We have over 9,000 registrations worldwide, and is more and more coming every day. And so we are doing some of the things which we didn't do before, because it was not our mandate. And it is not our mandate to build up a commercial team who chases commercial orders. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't do it? Well, probably not. I think everybody who loves Cardano and everybody who understands Cardano should be chasing, amazing applications who can live on Cardano. That's a part of being decentralized. And I'm actually extremely proud of what we've done with the country of Georgia. Because with the country of Georgia, which, by the way, is, I think 20% of the country is still occupied by the neighboring country. They actually are leapfrogging out into the digital age and is deploying blockchain. And we've been part of ensuring that the country of Georgia changed the national legislation to embrace cryptocurrencies and embrace blockchain. We have a country who now are running towards actually using the Cardano blockchain for agricultural purposes and writing directly on the Cardano blockchain. And yes, one of the products is wine. And what more beautiful thing is there in the country who invented wine than putting their wine bottles on a supply chain solution together with ScanTrust on the Cardano blockchain, which ensures authentication, verification, a type of digital identity, and the ability for people to trust what's happening on Web 2 and basically bringing Georgia into Web 3. So we can discuss whether that's a better use case than supporting a centralized social media platform. But I think what's important for the Cardano Foundation is to show what's possible on the Cardano blockchain. And then there is commercial companies already today, which is, chasing more commercial deals. Now, if there is an opportunity for us to do a deal with a multinational corporate or to do a deal with a national bank who kind of fits the values of the Cardano blockchain, I certainly think we should chase that. And we are chasing those deals. But we are really focusing on some other stuff as well, which includes also, the Cardano Summit. It includes, building some middle layer infrastructure who allows dApp developers and others to rely more on the blockchain, which includes monitoring and spinning up testnets. We just spun up a testnet with the Zurich University, which actually allows students at Zurich University, instead of working on a Bitcoin blockchain or an Ethereum blockchain, to learn blockchain on Cardano. And what they do there is now they actually have to basically do a stake pool. They have to, go through that job of doing that to get some ADA, and they have to write smart contracts, and they have to look at the incentive mechanisms, look at the protocol parameters. So they're essentially getting, master degrees and PhD degrees on Cardano, and they become, assets of companies. And now suddenly those companies are sitting with people who learned blockchain on Cardano. And that is a little bit the long edge, right? But yeah, I agree. I mean,
very.
Yeah, it's so. I don't think Cardano Foundation is a scam. I can definitely contest to that. But I do see the frustration specifically in bear markets, and I also think that we are a very different setup, we are focused on different things.
Well, I can see, just backtracking in our conversation, because your foundation setup is very different from the other ones, some of the other really big ones that fork out a lot of money for development in the ecosystem. So I know a lot of them just like millions and millions, like $750 million for a particular development fund in the ecosystem, and just go, bang, there you go. Who needs this money? Bang, 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 there we go. And with your setup with the Cardano Foundation, that's not possible because you just don't hold that kind of purse strings to make it doable. And the other thing that you mentioned just then before, just like to recap on that, is the Georgia wine deal and getting them onboarded on the blockchain. And then you mentioned something really beautiful, that the whole country is like embracing other aspects of the blockchain and doing other bits and pieces within blockchain industry, and really embracing it. I love that. I had no idea that the rest of the country is like embracing all of those different aspects and taking it all on board. So you're not just doing one little thing. It's kind of really evolving the country to embrace digital and to do their digital transformation over to blockchain first, which is absolutely amazing. That's really, really cool.
The country of Georgia actually looked at the title registry very early on with colored coin and Bitcoin, and they kind of paused that because it just didn't. The features was not rich enough. And that's another one of the use cases we are now looking with the Deputy Prime Minister of Georgia to push, but on Cardano. And can you imagine, now both of you and I, we both live in very stable countries, right? But I mean, as they have 20% of the territorial country is there's a foreign nation who occupies that. So suddenly the title registry, not just having a good title registry, but having a title registry who is immutable and is stored and backed up for 3,500 stake pool operators around the world, which is not identifiable, right? And has a economically sustainable infrastructure, becomes a very good proposition to a country in that situation. And so I, to be honest, I really think this is an amazing use case to look at.
Yeah, I completely agree. My parents coming from a country where their properties were taken away from them as well, and there's no proof that they can go back and say that's where I lived, that's where I grew up, this is my home, but they just can't prove that. So they've lost property as well, and blockchain would have really helped with that for that immutable record, which would have been absolutely amazing. So what is happening there in Georgia and embracing blockchain technology, and hopefully what the Cardano Foundation can do to lead them down the right path, would be absolutely fantastic, absolutely amazing. So I can't wait for that kind of future where countries are embracing that level of technology to do their data record keeping and everything else around it. So that would be absolutely fantastic. Now, there's still this communication, I think, fragmentation between the foundation and the community itself. I know podcast interviews like this, Twitter Spaces, etc. But is there a way that we can improve the communication between the foundation and the community at large, so that the community knows what the foundation is doing, like regular updates or something around that space, so that the community isn't, left in the dark about what the foundation are doing for months on end? And every summit suddenly, there's all these announcements, and there's years gone by, and people start to complain. So it's a way that we can avoid this.
Have you seen these blog series we've done the last 9 months, where we every 2-3 months actually have a blog where it's basically talking about what we have been doing, and for the last 2-3 months? Have you seen some of those?
I can't say I have, actually. I really can't say I have. Even being a Cardano ambassador, I can't say I've seen them.
I think so. We live in a society today. Well, it is out there, right? I've retweeted them, and I know they are on the Cardano Foundation's website. I know we put it into our Discord channel and so on, right? I think everything goes really, really fast, and I think there's a part of the community who is living very much on Twitter. And on Twitter, you're just limited to 160 characters, and if you're very good, you can do some threads and so on, right? But I do think that in the last 12 months, I've seen an incredible improvement in talking about what we do. But we also seen that people are simply overloaded with information, and people has their favorite places they go to. And if you kind of follow one or two, people on Twitter, or one or two people on LinkedIn, or one or two people on Baidu, or wherever you are, right? You don't necessarily get what's coming from us. So my big recommendation would be to whatever social media you're on, to really star the Cardano Foundation, so you're really sure that you read what we're tweeting about, and also go and visit our webpage. It is not the best webpage in the world. We're working on it, but for us, the Cardano Summit was the most important, to really get a place where we have 10, 15,000 people at one dump, get all of this. And then what we're going to do is we already have a skeleton for the new webpage, which is going to be much wider and much more explanatory. And then, of course, the developer portal. The developer portal is built and hosted by the Cardano Foundation's community team, right? And we are showcasing a lot of what we do. One of the beautiful things we also just did now is we actually, I'm a bit sad to say so, we actually did a voting system on mainnet on Cardano, which I'm not sure if you've seen, right? But it's amazing, right? And we actually use Sunday Swap, who's done a fantastic backend on that. We then did a little a widget, which basically allows you to do KYC AML and connect that to a non-custodial wallet, either through Discord or through, for instance, a phone messaging server, right? And we put that out in open source, and we see a lot of projects is already adopting that. But I think my recommendation would really be to ensure that you follow our news and you regularly go in on our webpage, where we actually try and write some blog posts and articles about that. And then but it's a crazy overload of information who is out there. So I fully understand that some people is not always having the time, and if you have good ideas about, if you want more videos, or you want more blogs, or if you want a book, or tell us. If a big chunk of the community says, "Hey, Cardano Foundation, we actually would prefer to have the information in a slightly different channel or a different format," I think our communication team would be very open to take any feedback. But I do feel that it is flowing, and it is available out there. It's just not hitting everybody, and that is very much also depending on your personal choice and preferences, from everything from cookies to who you follow, huh?
Yeah. Okay. I'll make sure some of those links and references that you mentioned are in the show notes here. So if anyone wants to follow up and have a better following of what the Cardano Foundation is doing, I'll make sure that's all
2
there.
days ago we launched the last, but I think it's called Blog Series 3. So yeah, there's a good blog there as well.
I do follow the summaries on the forum to keep up to date with what the foundation, what the community is doing there. But I don't think many people read the forum, not like I do. For the forums in general are a slightly older format, so I don't think people frequent them as much.
That's probably correct. Now, I agree with you on that.
Yes. Now, I want to just go back to some of the funding aspects. So because you mentioned a little bit earlier, the funding of the foundation is a little bit different with how it's structured. How does the foundation operate on a day-to-day basis? Where does it get its income from to actually pay for all the staff, the bills, and marketing operations and everything else that you guys do? Where's the money come from?
So the Cardano Foundation is a non-profit foundation. So the first thing, and that's probably very good in an aspect of that, it allows other people to commercialize Cardano before us. Because it is often so that if you become a subject matter expert in a emerging technology, you have some commercialization options which other people don't have. So I think that also allows us to be unbiased and not revenue and yield driven in a way which other entities potentially will focus on. But you need both, I would say. So we got what's called a grant from the original token issuing entity, or the original voucher entity, of 648 million ADA. And we did a bit of work in terms of verifying the original KYC and AML of the original voucher holders, which basically gave us some Bitcoin at that time. And that's sort of the pool of money which was then put into the legal construct, which is the foundation today. Then we're doing something slightly different than many other in the ecosystem do, right? So we don't optimize towards yield when we stake. We actually optimize to what we call community impact. So if you're familiar with our stake pool or stake delegation strategy, what you see is that we are trying to focus. First, we focused on only single stake pool operators, because what was important for us was decentralization. We wanted to have more stake pool operators, specifically small, innovative people who are playing around with it. So it's about inclusivity and decentralization. We then got up to a level where you can say, the K factor was here and the amount of stake pool operators was here. We don't control K. Obviously, we can speak about it, but we don't control that. So what we then said is, what is important now is we have actually the ability for having native assets. We have the ability to have smart contracts, and we have the ability to use metadata. So what's important for us is that we support moderators, builders, and engineers in Cardano. So people who do something for the community, and we want to incentivize them, ensuring that they can keep doing that, but still staying true to the single stake pool operator principle. So what we have now is that these single stake pool operators, they can basically apply to the Cardano Foundation. Then we have the partnership team and the community team who's basically vetting them into a category. And then there's a shortlist. That shortlist is then being randomized through a randomization algorithm. And then we, on a 3-month basis, we delegate there. But we would be able to get a much higher yield if we would be staking towards yield generation. But we feel that the purpose of the Cardano Foundation is to promote this technology. And that also means that, for instance, we did this with UBX, the Union Bank of Philippines. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but we do some of those things to show people what is actually possible. But the only income we actually have is either selling some of the Bitcoins, which we have, or selling some of the ADA, which we have, or basically looking at our treasury. So sometimes what we do some covered calls and some other things, which gives us a little bit of a passive income. But we are net negative, meaning that we are spending more than we are earning, which means that let's say our treasury is decreasing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because our purpose is to make the biggest impact we can on the long term of the Cardano ecosystem within the mandate we have. So we don't have any real income sources outside staking today, is the short answer.
Right. As a business operator, that would drive me nuts. To run a business that is slowly hemorrhaging its income and money over time, that's just doesn't make sense to me. It just really messes with my mind. I'm always trying to think, how to bring more income into the business to pay for more staff and to scale up and grow. And this is quite a different idea and concept. But go on.
It is hard, because when you think about some other constructs like us, they're very motivated of the token price. And if you think about the only income is actually, with the unit of account in the token price, you could kind of quickly take the assumption that the Cardano Foundation should try and push the token price to go up. But we actually been very tough on that, and basically said that there's nobody in the Cardano Foundation should be incentivized of the token price going up. Now, that for certain parts of the community would be very, this is wrong, because we only bought ADA because the token should go up. But the whole idea about the Cardano Foundation, as I mentioned before from the deed, is the promotion of these decentralized computer systems and the utility value of those. And if you kind of think about it, if the token price, let's say, go to $1,000 today, right? We would actually need to adjust the transaction fees quite dramatically and quite fast, and we would have to have governance in place. A Voltaire would need to be in place, that we could have a good process of doing that quite fast. Otherwise, we would go into a little bit of let's say, a problem we've seen one of the leading blockchains having, where it's simply too expensive to do a transaction or to use it for commercial usage, right? So it's a very, very interesting discussion around incentives and what is the right way of doing it. But I think it does drive me, I wouldn't say mad, but it is something we are focused on, of course, because I think the funding needs are very high right now in the early days, and then over time it will hopefully decrease. But because we don't have a supply of funds coming in, at least not yet, and we're not looking actively of finding that at the moment. We're looking actively of making impact for the Cardano blockchain, current ecosystem, and the future users of it. It's a contrarian situation we find ourselves in.
So how is the money spent then? How do you decide to spend your money on impactful things? Like, do you go through lots of meetings and stuff to work out what level of impact you can have in certain areas? Are there goals that are set? You need to make impact in these regions, these areas. How do you decide on those factors?
Well, we basically have a strategy, right? So, I mean, if you think about it, there's the Articles of Association, which in our case called the Foundation Deed, which is what the original founders basically dedicated the foundations to the purpose of the foundation, which is then in terms of checks and balances, where we have this supervisory authority, right? And then we have a strategy, which we have validated with Imurgo and with IoT about how we go forward and what we should be focusing on. And then we basically try to make the biggest impact we can with the least amount of resources. So currently we have 4 buckets we are focusing on. The first bucket is the future-proofing the technology stack of the Cardano ecosystem and the economic environment, the economic sustainability of Cardano as such. And you will probably have heard about the MBO and open source and why we are pushing towards the ability that people can contribute to the technology roadmap and to the technology stack and the protocol, because we've seen from open source that is not just a fantastic way in terms of economic sustainability, but it also gives great adoption, and it allows people to believe in the technology stack in a complete different way than before. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket is, we call it blockchain operations. So there was a situation where the federated companies or the federated institutions, so Immurgo, IOG, and the Cardano Foundation, they started running the first instance of the blockchain. And then basically what came into place was the incentivized testnet. The incentivized testnet, basically, we then went from basically only 3 entities was running the nodes to now a situation where more than 3,000 individuals and corporates are running those nodes. But there's still 200 relay nodes. So there's still a choke point happening here where all of these nodes actually are connecting to a centralized center of relay nodes before it's being sent back. The idea is then that we're going to get P2P, which allows the nodes to find each other out here on the protocol level, right? But what that means is that the stake pool operators will be operating the mainnet, right? So this is decentralization. This is beautiful. But who is then responsible for, let's say, ensuring that when new versions of the code is coming, or if somebody's attacking the network, or can you even do a rollback or monitoring, all of that? Currently, we only have one entity doing that, which is IOG. And we basically raised our hand and said, I think it's probably good if not just one entity is doing that. So that's also why we are actively working on setting up, test nets and governance test nets. And together with stake pool operators and universities, we are working with University of Zurich around understanding the incentives and how things are happening on the chain in comparison with other chains to ensure that if we see something bad happening, that we can actually, raise the flag and have some actions in place, disaster recovery and so on. So instead of only one entity is doing that, we would like that at least 2 or more entities is doing that. And over time, hopefully, there will be a whole business model around it. So that's the second bucket. The third bucket is PR and branding or marketing. And I think we can all agree that even though Cardano has one of the biggest and most beautiful communities, if you speak about blockchain, most people actually don't know what Cardano is. They might know Bitcoin, they might know Ethereum, they might know Solana and so on, but they don't know what Cardano is. So we do think that we need to do more marketing around that. And that was originally actually not the Cardano Foundation's job, but in lack of better, we think that this is now the time. We now have a maturity of this beautiful ecosystem and this beautiful technology, which means that a lot more people should be knowing about this. So what we're trying to do is not doing so much brand as such, but more thinking about marketing activation and thinking about how do we go to a situation that Cardano is not known for ADA, but Cardano is known for utility and enterprise application and DEXs and gamify and all those things you can do because that transition means that Cardano becomes a wider stack, right? And then the fourth bucket, which we are focusing on, is what we call adoption. And we're going to come with some announcements around some education, hopefully at the summit, because we do feel that solid educational material, which is up to date, which can be translated in every language available if ambassadors and others wants to do that, but it gives you a reference. And that has to be covered by, let's call it an open source license. So you should not be scared of taking that directly and reproducing that in another language. And for instance, in the community in Nigeria, one of the things we hear the most is, give us some education so we can start educating our community, so we can start teaching people about it so they can interact with your blockchain. And today that doesn't exist on Cardano. There is no take it when you want it for free educational material who's up to date. So one thing is education. The other thing is the summit, which basically we see as a large growth initiative and activation. And then there is some lags in the, let's call it between the value capture layer and the blockchain, which is needed. to ensure that you can build larger applications. So we hear very often that people have some problems about DP Sync, or people have some problems with the wallet backend, and people have issues in terms of, why do I need to write everything from the scratch? Can't I just, copy a part of that code and put things together, right? So we have some projects around specifically the lib services. So how can we ensure that they become more standardized and faster and more scalable? How do we ensure that we have Cardano explorers who actually always is up, but also can be a guiding stick for regulators, policymakers, and enterprises, so they can actually see concretely the money flow, not from an engineer's perspective, but from a solution designer perspective, and so on. So that's sort of the growth bucket. So that's the 4 buckets we're focusing on. And then the 5th bucket is, of course, operations. We need to have HR, and we need to do reporting, and we need to do certain things to keep the wheels in motion. Intellectual property, right? You'll be amazed how many people around the world who's claiming Cardano every week. If you haven't done anything in Bangladesh lately, right, then suddenly somebody says, "Oh, this is a great brand." They're actually not protected in Bangladesh, so they're basically claiming the intellectual property right for Bangladesh. They sell a lot of T-shirts or do a little business so they can show that there's a cash flow, and then they basically go out on the international stage and they put claim to Cardano or put claim to ADA, which is really a problem, right? Because then you have some problems with scam, right? Because if one thing is that people have an address who looks like us, another one is having an address who is exactly like us. Think about Cardano.inc or something like that, right? So we actually use quite a lot of time protecting intellectual property, right? But ensuring that the people who love Cardano have access to the logo and the brand. So there are some things around our operations there as well. So that's sort of the 5 buckets we're focusing on.
Okay, that's really good to know that. Now, I want to touch back on a little bit around the governance. So you talked about all the ADA that is being delegated to the stake pools and whatnot, and we talked about Voltaire and everything that's coming around that. Now, with there's a specific conversation that was happening on Twitter around the ADA that is being used to stake to all the stake pools, etc., all the ADA that you guys have. Is that ADA being used for voting in Project Catalyst at all? And if you are, is there any transparency in regards to what you guys are voting for?
So we think that a democracy is only good if everybody participates in the democracy. Now, in the current way of voting in Catalyst, there's a range of problems, which IOG is very much aware of and taking an action on. But one of the largest problems we see is that there is no explorer where a third party can actually go in and validate the ballot and see how people actually voted and not voted. This is all managed by one single entity. So we were very skeptical. Should we go in and vote and shouldn't we vote? And we are a bit unbiased, right? We don't have commercial interest as such, right? So one thing we said is we didn't want to vote on a specific project. So what we do is we vote on a direction. So we vote on the themes or the pools, right? So if there's a pool about developer tools, we think that is important to that is actually becoming a part of the next round of Catalyst. So we're at the current stage, and we don't have plans of changing that. We don't vote on a company or a project. We vote on themes we find is important. The second part is that we registered a lot of wallets to vote. And one of the reasons we did that is we actually wanted to understand exactly what is the transparency of Catalyst and how does it actually work on chain in terms of the snapshot who's been taken compared to what actually happens when you vote and who actually can see that you voted and with how much you voted. So we actually registered quite a few wallets. I believe we registered 10 wallets. Actually, I registered 10 wallets to be very specific.
Okay.
But we only voted with a very little amount. So we didn't vote with the 10 wallets. We actually only voted with 1 wallet. And then after we voted a few times, suddenly somebody in the community kind of poked up and said, "Oh, hold on a second. These guys are voting with a substantial amount. And this might skew the democracy here." And the fact of the matter was that's not correct. Because we only voted with 1 wallet because we were very much aware and we did not want to skew that. So what we actually do is we actually take the data from the last fund, and then we basically do a bit of math, and we try to ensure that we that we do vote, but we don't vote with such a way that we actually become, let's say, the whale who pops over and basically decides the whole outcome, because there is still not enough
Yeah.
people who vote in Catalyst, and there is still not enough transparency around that. So you are right, we are voting, and I think we should be voting, but no, we are not voting with the majority of our ADA. We are very much aware of how that looks, but we still think that there should be much better tools, and I think that is coming with the new voting centers, and hopefully we will get to a situation that voting actually happens on mainnet, so there is social accountability, and you can actually check that in Explorers. And as you know, we actually publicize our wallet addresses so that people can be able to actually see that and verify that. But we're very much aware of that situation.
Okay. Well, we'll see what comes up with the upcoming announcements in Scotland to see what's happening around Voltaire and what IOG are doing around that space as well. So it'll be very interesting to see. Now, one of the other things that you mentioned a little bit earlier is the MBO, or the members-based organization. And this is a little bit of an interesting topic of conversation that's come up recently about allowing members, people of the Cardano community, to join the foundation as members. Is that correct? Can you explain a little bit more about this concept? It's a little bit new to me, and I haven't followed up too much about it.
Sure. So Cardano's greatest strength is actually its current and its future community. And it's certainly at the forefront of everything I've been trying to do since I took over at the handle at the Cardano Foundation. I think one model for community engagement and development that we've been looking at very seriously is open source. This is a phrase that's often used in blockchain, but not always a way that chimes with the true philosophy of open source. So very often what we said in blockchain was it's open source because the GitHub repos are public. And we basically say, oh, then there's some extra trust because people can just go in and see the code. And they can even take the code if they want them, and that can create some spillover effects that more people believe in blockchain. But the real idea about open source is this idea that you can scratch your own itch. So if you are a company who relies on a blockchain or an open source infrastructure, what you want to do is you want to ensure that you can contribute to it. There needs to be a system who ensures that you can contribute to the product to market fit. So what you need also next year and in 5 years and 10 years from here are features. You need to have a process where you can participate in that, let's call it technology roadmap, but also implementation of that technology roadmap. And in blockchain, this has very often been funded directly from these ICOs, where there's one or two founders or a set of founders who basically has a very strong hypothesis to, this is the product to market fit, and this is how we solve a given problem. But Cardano is actually made for change. Cardano is made to solve a whole range of different problems. Therefore, we thought it would be an amazing opportunity to take the best of open source, not just the public GitHub repositories, but really the best of the open source governance, the best of the economic sustainability, and these processes and ideas about how you can contribute to it. So you ensure that if you rely on the technology stack, you can be part of giving feedback, implementing features, and steering the future roadmap from that. So that's basically how we've been pushing open source and how we've been interacting with the community about that. And I think MBO, so a membership-based organization that's set up in the right way, has the potential to marry the very best aspects of this open source model with the very best aspects of our current community engagement model, and bring together to improve the operational resilience of Cardano, not just now, but in the future, to foster innovation and adoption on our platform. And next week, IO is going to be presenting an outline vision for the membership-based organization with open source as its heart. And I think it's crucial, however, that it's seen as just the beginning of a process. This is a suggestion IOG is coming out with. But without community buy-in and engagement, there's simply no point in creating a new entity. So I'm really looking forward to discussing this model at our summit, and have tasked my team with developing and executing a really rigorous community engagement plan for the weeks and months ahead to ensure that this membership-based organization is as strategic, principled, and as effective as possible. But it is also about a transformation from these single or federated entities to a larger community engagement Voltaire era. And I think personally that the best way of looking at this is that you need to separate the software code base from the mainnet operation. So the way I think about it is that the stake pool operators are in a decentralized operating or operating the protocol. These are the people who actually runs the protocol. And open source is about decentralized innovation. So how can we get to a decentralized innovation process with the best principles of open source and put that in on a layer on the stake pool operators while still having different versions of the code and different features and stuff like that who lives in the code base who doesn't necessarily make it to mainnet? Because if we can create a situation where we have an unbiased membership-led organization who takes, who can basically take care of these, open source models and these GitHub repositories, we might get into a situation that, I don't know, BMW thinks about the next operating system for their car, but they're not ready to go on a Cardano blockchain, but they might take some of the principles who's in this code stack and they might contribute to the code stack. They might even be members of the code stack, but not using mainnet. Why is that good? Well, that's good because the more maturity you have over here and the more features you get and the more product to market fit you get from, the people who live on technology, the better the product is you're pushing in to live on top of the stake pool operators. Now, obviously, it would be ideal if, in this case, BMW would also live on mainnet, but either or, you get better code, you get a more tighter product to market fit, you get better, you get more brains to contribute and a structured process for other people to contribute, you get more longevity in the economic sustainability, and you get a better mainnet out of it, right? So I think this is really how we think about it in the Cardano Foundation, and we're really excited to hear what Charles is going to present, and looking forward to the discussions with the community coming after that towards getting the absolute best model for Cardano, the protocol, the code base, and everybody who's going to live on Cardano in the future.
I love it. Having worked in the open source space myself for so many years, I see so much value in moving Cardano to a full open source model and having anyone that wants to contribute in their way, and making a lot of impact that way. In terms of a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say the open sourceness, how open source is Cardano at the moment on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like really open source, really ideal, something like a Linux or down that path?
So I'm not an open source specialist. That's why we hired Dirk Horndl, who was one of the co-founders of Linux. Unfortunately, he got a really good offer from the classical world, which he just had to take. But working with him for 6 to 9 months and also meeting his contacts and really working closely with some of the large open source foundations, we've done quite a lot of work in the back end now around some of those things. And I think you just saw the improvements the Cardano Foundation and ZIP editors have done with the ZIPs process, where we actually brought it up to state of the art for open source improvement proposals, right? I think we already came a good way. But when I joined Cardano, I thought it was open source. I thought this was the state of the art of open source. But what I really learned with Dirk and that whole ecosystem is that it was probably more public source, and there was a lot lacking. But I'm really proud to say that the IG engineering teams has been working with Dirk and really made huge improvements in some of these GitHub repositories and so some of the social dynamic. So I think we've made huge leaps forward. Now, what's going to be very interesting is the two different business models. So there is a current business model that you have a treasury on-chain and off-chain who kind of funds, engineering teams to provide something and then bring it on mainnet. And then you have this idea that, it's like in altruism, if you fund something directly, it's different people who would do it. There's this famous example, I think it was in the US, where they were lacking some blood, and then they started paying people to give blood. And then suddenly all the people who were giving it because of altruism and because they really wanted to do something for society, they stopped giving blood because, they didn't want to bother to do that for X amount of dollars, right? So what I'm really looking forward to is how do we get the best out of those two worlds without actually destroying what we've seen work so well in open source, but still get something really positive out of that. There is a decentralized treasury managed by Catalyst at the moment, right? And there is some reserves which is set aside to the future development of Cardano. But how do we ensure this the incentive model from open source really comes in? So I think there's still quite a lot of work to do, and I think specifically getting the MBO right, and I think you need to split the governance of the mainnet from the actual code stack to do that. But I'm looking forward to the discussions at the summit, and after that to ensure that we get the best and we take the best decisions about that.
Yeah, I see this as being a very long roadmap, really. I can't see, we're just flicking a switch and then suddenly we're in a MBO structure and we're all happy. I see this taking years, really, for change to happen, 2, 3, maybe 4 years for it to really happen. So we just got to sit
I think most people, they think you just have an Apache version 2 license and then everybody will start contributing, and that's not how it works. It really isn't.
No.
And we've seen a lot of projects in open source who fail because somebody built something beautiful, they made it open source, and they thought that the community will maintain it, and they didn't, and then it fails, right? Or the governance process is so stringent or so is in such a way that people just don't want to be a part of it because they can't contribute in the way they want to contribute, right? And then when there's no contribution and then funding runs out from the entity or whatever funding mechanism there is, then the project de facto is dead, right? And then we start seeing forks and so on. Yeah. So I do think I'm with you 100%, Peter. This is not tomorrow or something like that. This will take time. But I think it's very important because it's part of this transformation towards a more decentralized technology roadmap of the future.
We're coming to the end of this interview, and I just want to wrap up with a couple of key questions here. First off, the summit's just coming up around the corner. What are you most excited about? What can you leak? What can you tell us?
There's a few announcements which I'm very excited about. But I think I'm really excited about being together with so many people who's building on Cardano and have made experiences in building on Cardano, and talking to them physically, being with them and getting feedback about, what they see works and doesn't work. And we also have invited a lot of people who don't have experience in building on blockchain. And we would even have, for instance, the chief economist of Algorand there on stage, and we'll be discussing proof of stake. So I think there is some new elements coming into it, which I'm really looking forward to, because it shows that the ecosystem is breaching the boundaries of Cardano. We're now really also going into the age of interoperability and into enterprise adoption. So being in this vacuum for a whole weekend with people from around the world who has experience in building, who has not experience in building, but all of them sees the value of what a blockchain can do, and talk to them optimistically about what this can be and how we get that done, and then hopefully closing some integration projects and some deals, and encouraging some banks and exchanges and some wallet providers and others to enhance their offering so they become much more native to what Cardano actually can do. That's some of the things I'm really looking forward to.
Okay, all right, little leaks there, I think. All right. I really wish I could be there in Lausanne, but I'm organising the local summit event here in Brisbane, Australia. But here alone, there are so many community members that are so passionate building on Cardano. Here, if you can't make it to the main event in Lausanne, look up where the local ones are. Highly recommend engaging with the communities there. It's such a buzz. It's really good meeting people, learning from each other, and just feeling the energy of the room. So it's highly recommended that you go out and meet people in real life and talk to people and learn everything that you can about the Cardano ecosystem in general. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, and then remember to click like and subscribe to Peter's podcast. No, I'm serious, right? I mean, I think you're doing a lot, not just as a Cardano ambassador and for the ecosystem down there, but also international, about teaching people what Cardano is and what it isn't, and what you can do and how you can participate and contribute. I think that's really important. And also your experience in open source brings me hope that we have people who can actually help us on this journey and raise the right questions and take the ball forward on some of those topics.
So far, it's been an absolute pleasure doing all this work. It's been so much fun. Now, what are you most excited about next year for Cardano's future? We've had a very exciting 2021, 2022 with smart contracts and scalability coming into play. What about 2023? What are you most excited about for Cardano?
Oh, there's so many things I'm excited about. There are some certain integrations which I'm not able to talk to about right now, but I'm hoping that they will land, because they will really move the needle, both short term and long term. But I think what I'm mainly excited about is to see Cardano maturing outside the people who know and love Cardano today, because I think what we see around us is mayhem, right? We see a lot of things breaking down and so on. And there is one pillar of light in all of that, and that's called Cardano. It keeps running, it keeps improving, it keeps implementing, and it keeps adding value in local communities around the world. And we keep exploring new ways of building blockchain for good and implementing that wherever you are around the world. And being part of that journey, I think, is amazing, and I'm very grateful that I can do that.
Brilliant. Now, very last question here. Now, it's always been about, what can the Cardano Foundation do for me? What's the Cardano Foundation doing for Cardano in general? But what about us? What can the community do for you guys to help you do a better job, help make your job easier, so you can create more impact in the world? What can we do as a community to help the foundation?
So it's really two things, and they might not be as obvious, but feel free to dig into them.
Okay.
The first one is focus on use cases which is not related to token ownership. Now, I want to be very clear. I like tokenization. I love cryptocurrencies, but there is so little information about where does a blockchain truly add value, and specifically with the architecture choice of Cardano, there are so many industries where we can move the needle, we can save jobs, we can create new jobs, we can, create sustainable footprint on the Mother Earth, we can, change operating models. We can do so much, but there's so little information about those use cases, and so little reusable code, and so little information shareable and human understandable out there around us. So these utility use cases, which is not related to token ownership, spread the word about them, help us to document it, help us to show the world all the beauty a blockchain can do. Because if we do that, we will have even more to offer on cryptocurrencies as well. The other part, which is a little bit related to this, is education. We really need to ensure that education becomes much more available, becomes much more consumable, and is accessible in multiple languages and multiple styles of delivery. It cannot be that if you have to learn blockchain, you start on Bitcoin. You have to start on something like Cardano to understand the true magnificence and the true scope of what a blockchain can do. Now, I do love Bitcoin, but if you start with Bitcoin, you have a lot of limitations in terms of no smart contracts and so forth, right? So I think, spreading education, and I said, we are going to have some announcements coming around that here at the summit, right? But, taking that, translating that, and using that in your local communities, and maybe putting that into your local schools, and it will be all for free. There will be no, problems with intellectual property right and all of that. So, wherever your kids go to school, ask them, can I teach one day a year and teach the young kids about blockchain, right? Wherever you go to work, if there's one day a year you can volunteer to do something, why don't you do an after hours meetup and teach people what blockchain really can do, and how, giving identity to the billions who don't have it, and how the back offices can change, and how all these things can happen on something like a third generation blockchain. I think that's the two things I would really, really enjoy the community to help us to do. And if you need tools about that, let us know, because we'll be very happy to try and supply that and work with wherever you are to get some of those tools out there.
Amazing. Okay. Frederick, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, learning everything about the foundation, a little bit about yourself as well, and all the things that you guys are working on. The goals of trying to make Cardano a better platform for everyone to use, pushing the limits of open source and everything else around it. I'm looking forward to the future. It's going to be very, very exciting. And hopefully one day I get to meet you over at a Cardano summit somewhere in the world.
Yeah, or maybe Singapore FinTech Festival next year. It's closer to both of us then, huh?
Yeah,
halfway.
It's a little bit closer. Yeah, meet you halfway. Brilliant. Thank you, Frederick.
Thank you for your contribution, and thank you for having me on the podcast.
Now, I think I've got all the show notes down below in the description for you. So all the links to the Swiss Foundation, the conversations around the Cardano Foundation as well, the blogs, etc. So everything should be there. Check it out. Hit me up if I've missed anything. Now, if you enjoyed the content, please consider giving me that thumbs up, click subscribe, click on the notification bell, and I'll bring out a lot more Cardano related content for you. I'll also be clipping these into shorter clips, so it's a little bit easier for people to digest too. All right, cool. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.
Yeah, gotta do it like that. You've been listening to the Learn Cardano podcast. Gotta get it hype. Crypto is what we like, but this is not investment or financial advice. Gotta do your research, cause it's risky. We know it is. This show is educational and it's informative. Crypto's the future, really, it ain't no debating.